So this class was a class that I was super excited to take. I don't know a lot about superheroes, or I didn't know the inner workings of all of the storylines and stuff, but growing up I did watch a lot of Marvel movies and I did really enjoy them and thought they were really interesting. This class taught me a lot about how to bring justice concepts into the real world and made me better at applying these concepts to things in my life. One of the first concepts we went over was about superheroes and fascism, and this lesson was the first where my eyes opened into the ways that these authors were explicitly putting political and cultural topics into these comics. Superheroes had always been a fun thing for me, and this lesson allowed me to take a more deeper look into the purpose behind these heroes. Although I don't think superheroes are necessarily fascist, they do have many of these overarching ideas, and they have the all-encompassing power. They don't really have a regard for authority. So while superheroes may not be fascist, I do think that some supervillains definitely may be. Villains was the next topic we covered in class when we were talking about Batman. Specifically Batman villains and Gotham City with theories of crime. This was actually one of my favorite lessons, especially when we connected the different villains to the different theories of crime. I thought that was really interesting, and it was fun to be able to put the names to those topics that we had learned about in class. And then skipping a little bit ahead to when we covered Wonder Woman, gender studies and feminist ideals and classes have never really interested me. They obviously pertain to my life, but they're not something I'm necessarily interested in pursuing a career in. So I didn't think that this lesson would be super interesting to me, especially since a lot of the gender-based classes kind of follow very similar topics and themes and kind of teach the same thing. But this class was actually super fun for me, and I loved looking at the images when we compared these superheroines versus superheroes and kind of how they're all portrayed. I do remember in class there was a picture of a bunch of shirtless Marvel men and then a comment that someone had left. It was saying how the portrayal of men was still unrealistic and still just as bad as the portrayal of women. I remember that we had discussed this, and I never spoke when we discussed this, but I actually did have a thought during this class and I never said it. And while I do think that both of these portrayals are unrealistic, no normal person looks like this on a daily basis. You have to work really hard to look like that. I do think that it's a very different in terms of sexualization and stuff, because a male superhero, often they have these powers of strength, or their job is a superhero, so they're very active and they're constantly moving or beating people up or fighting, and having bigger muscles and being toned, in my opinion, would be a natural kind of consequence of this heroism. Obviously someone like Thor, who is a god, or Superman, who has superhuman strength, or even Spider-Man, who's swinging from buildings, has to hold himself up, hold himself on his arm. They're gonna gain muscle. But I think the difference with the female heroes is that the way that they're portrayed isn't as these hyper muscular girls. They are portrayed as super thin and curvy and actually having almost no muscle, but somehow having huge butts, huge boobs, and actually someone who would be doing all this activity, like Black Widow, who would be, she's very active. She was a trained spy. Obviously they would be skinny, obviously they'd be thin, they're fighting all the time, they're working out, but they also would have muscle and they would be strong. And honestly, when humans are muscular, they usually have smaller boobs and butts, and that's something that isn't portrayed. And so kind of these heroines are shown really sexualized, and I think that that's a very different reality between these two that it wasn't really talked about. But that's kind of a really unrelated thing. It's just something I never said in class that I did think about. I really enjoyed the classes talking about Marvel and Black heroes. I also loved our guest speaker. She was super insightful and intelligent and obviously very passionate about her work. I had never heard about Afrofuturism before, and I think it's very interesting and something that I definitely would look into further in my future. Overall, I loved this class and I would definitely recommend it to anyone that asked. Being able to apply stuff that you've learned in previous classes to kind of unrelated topics is super fun and super interesting, and something that helps you in real world cases and ideas.